Words of the Apostle Paul to the congregation in Corinth in his second letter. To keep me from being too proud, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, to keep me from being too proud. 3 times I appealed to the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong." It's amazing the troubles, the predicaments, the limitations, the defects that human life is prey to. Here is an actual list of the notes of a dispatcher in response to 9/11 calls in a major metropolitan area. Person has arm stuck in an ATM machine. 18-year-old male can't get any rest at home, would like a ride to the hospital. 61-year-old worried because her stomach is not growling. Lady has headache for 4 days and husband has no money for aspirin. Person answers no to question, "Are you conscious?" Lady has blisters on her feet from being lost for 3 days trying to find Taco Bell. Bee stuck in child's nostril. Daughter says mother is acting weird. Man shot 2 months ago says he feels dizzy and is worried about the bullet. Lady from New York has been drinking, feels ill, has spent all her money on jerks, she says. Man out of breath from running from the police. Person has been hiccuping for 4 days. Life certainly does have its handicaps, limitations, does it not? But it's not hard to pull together a list of far more serious hurdles that people we know, if not ourselves, people we know are confronting. Chronic depression, dyslexia, disintegrating disc, failing eyesight, diabetes, career collapse, anorexia, migraine, stroke, widowhood, alcoholic parents, alcoholic children, arthritis, divorce, heart disease, MS, deafness, deformity, Alzheimer's, cancer, isolation, unemployment, emotionally disturbed child, relative, friend, neighbor. I mean, the list of weights, of obstacles, of hindrances to a full and fulfilling life is literally endless. Some of them are obvious and public, severe to the point of deep tragedy, official handicaps, as it were. Others are quite invisible behind the scenes, less limiting perhaps, but it is a rare person who does not sooner or later run up against some kind of limitation, some barrier to be overcome if any semblance of life is to go on. I don't want to seem to trivialize the deeper agony that unfairly afflicts some when I point out that we all sooner or later face some sort of discomfort, some sort of defect we need to struggle with. Nor would I suggest for a moment that there's anything automatically good and growth producing in suffering, misery, setback, handicap, limitations. It's not hard to illustrate that. Lord Byron and Sir Walter Scott were great friends. Both were crippled, about to the same measure. Lord Byron became increasingly embittered by his handicap until he brooded for hours, even days upon it, and got to the point where he would not go out in public. Sir Walter Scott, on the other hand, never complained, spoke one bitter word, not even to his dearest friend. Lord Byron once wrote to Scott, "Ah, Scott, I would give all my face." He was known as the most handsome man of his generation. "I would give all my face to have your happiness." Perhaps the face was the problem. What then can we make of the many difficulties and trials that we do encounter as we move through this world? Is there anything positive we can say about the imperfections, the hardships, the adversities, the handicaps, the limitations of life on this earth? We live in a culture that tends to see these in largely negative terms, as obstacles to be overcome by technology or drug or pill. We are a culture that idolizes pain-free existence and will do almost anything to ensure it or secure it. But both ancient faith and our own experience tell us that there are some things we can say. Our troubles, if encountered in the right spirit and from the right perspective, can in a way be the making of us, the occasion and impetus at least for immense growth and maturity, for strength and comprehension, often beyond strength and contribution, often beyond our own comprehension. Karen Casey writes for Hazelden in a little volume called The Promise of a New Day, a little volume that Marlene and I like to read for our morning devotions. She writes these words: "Those areas of our lives we struggle with most, such as impatience, control, energy, procrastination, offer us opportunities. Our human need to be rid of defects can hamper our progress in life. Defects have so much to teach us. They offer us meaningful opportunities for growth and maturity." So it is not particularly surprising that in the biblical story, God seems best able to use those who suffer from some disability, some handicap. Moses was a stutterer. Jeremiah said he was too young and too anxious. David was the last son of a peasant family, almost ignored by his father. Amos said, "I'm no prophet." Peter's impetuosity and recklessness are legendary. Paul suffered from constant headaches and poor eyesight, which we surmise were due to a virulent form of uncurable malaria that plagued that part of the world. And we might note that Jesus probably grew to manhood without the presence of an earthly father. So what can we mine from our troubles? What can we learn from our limitations? I think that's the question. Well, in the first place, many learn, again, a new dependency that the self-sufficient never quite know. Reality is this: if we have been able to manage quite well, thank you, on our own, if we've never been up against challenges that seem beyond our own resources, if we found our way in life easy enough to stay happily self-sufficient, we probably never sense the meaning of the word God. Because God becomes most real, becomes refuge and strength only for those who run up against their creaturely limits in life, only for those up against more than they can manage in their own individual strength. I'm no position to offer any advice to our national leaders with respect to the grave responsibilities and decisions they face. I can express the hope that we as a nation will learn or have learned from the events of 9/11 the real meaning of a nation or people under God. It means, does it not, that we are not God. Powerful as we are not all-powerful. Even we in America have our vulnerabilities, our limitations, and learning that may be a source of a new kind of unity and strength and resolve. So Moses cries out, "Why me, Lord? I'm not up to it. I stutter. Find somebody else." So Paul cries out for 3 periods in his life, "Lord, take these headaches away." Moses learns that God gives speech when you don't have any. Paul learns that it is precisely in his weakness and dependency that another strength mysteriously comes. A great dependency out of life's worst defeats. Dee Jepson, wife of the former senator from Iowa, Roger Jepson, some years ago she says she hit a point that almost buried her. "I remember a time when I was really hurting emotionally and frustrated. Our problems had gone on for years. I was lying on my living room floor crying. I was all alone, as was often the case. My children were involved in other activities. My husband, as usual, was out of town. In desperation, I cried out, 'I don't care how rocky the ground you allow me to be dragged over. I will not let go of the plow and look back. I'm going to hang on to you, God, and I will not give up.' And something happened to me at that moment. It was a trust, a commitment to accept whatever happened, and from that point, my life slowly began to change. A great dependency. My very weakness makes me strong in Him. And if accepted and embraced, also, in addition to a sense of dependency, a great discipline that the soft never know. Some years ago, the late Ann Landers received this letter from a 16-year-old, which she never quite forgot. Dear Ann, I'm sure you've never heard of a problem like mine before. What troubles me is that I have no problems. I don't want to sound conceited, but I'm a very pretty, mature 16-year-old girl. My figure is great. My skin is like peaches and cream. I have all the dates I can handle. Loads of girlfriends say they wish they were in my shoes. My grades are top, and I win everything I try for at school. Something has to be wrong with me because nobody's perfect. What could it be? Signed, Miss Want to Know. And responds, what this probably means is that you don't know a problem when you see one, kiddo. Now, when we hear that story, silly as it may sound, we know that that poor girl is headed for trouble because she's ill prepared for real life, precisely because she's never been tested at all. None of us seeks out pain and trouble, wills for ourselves or those we love, handicap or disaster. That would be a sick mind. But we do know, upon a bit of reflection, that it is the struggles and troubles that we have encountered that have in many ways disciplined and matured us. In a famous study by sociologists Victor and Mildred Goetzel, the home backgrounds of 300 highly successful people were investigated, people who had made it to the top, as it were, men and women such as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Helen Keller, Winston Churchill, Albert Schweitzer, Clara Barton, Einstein, Sigmund Freud. The study yielded some very interesting results. 3/4 of these people as children were the products of poverty or a broken home or rejecting and cruel parents. 74 of 85 writers in the list of fiction or drama, and 16 of the 20 poets came from homes highly dysfunctional, homes of severe trauma. Physical handicaps characterized over 1/4 of the sample. One of them, famous novelist and Southern writer, at least in the South, he was famous, Walker Percy, who wrote Second Coming and Moviegoer and Lost in the Cosmos and other very important books. Whether you've ever read him, I commend him to you. He lived all his life in Louisiana. He died in 1990. He came from an extremely dysfunctional family. Many of his closest family members committed suicide during his life as a young person. After being raised by a cousin, Percy attended that cosmopolitan Southern University at Chapel Hill. In 1937, he entered Columbia University to study medicine. A year after he received his MD at the age of 26, and while working as an intern at Bellevue Hospital in New York City, he contracted tuberculosis, they think from a cadaver. This sent him into an extended period of recuperation, 4 years, forcing him, in his own words, not so much to try and change my own life as to give me permission to allow it to be changed. When he was recovering, or while he was recovering, he read from Dostoevsky, Thomas Mann, Augustine, Aquinas, Kierkegaard. By the time he was 30, after this medically imposed, as he called it, waiting room, Walker Percy arose, determined to do what he would with his life. He would become a writer. And he attributes to his disability a new discipline and determination that stayed with him all his days. His novels and writings especially are eloquent testimony to his Christian faith. So writes the apostle, I can even enjoy weakness, suffering, privations, persecutions, and difficulties for Christ's sake. If embraced as a secret gift, our handicaps, our troubles, can grant us some new sense of personal discipline and determination, right along with that new sense of dependency. And then finally, there is in our acceptance of our pains occasionally very special dividends. The gift of inspiration to those around us, an impact upon others that the easy life never quite gives. Paul says God told him, it is better this way, for where there is weakness, my power is demonstrated the more completely. And I think you and I all recognize that some of the greatest gifts we have received from friends and loved ones have been the gifts of their courage and their inspiration under fire. They say to us, if I can do it, so can you. A little 3-minute play by Thornton Wilder, which tells of an ailing physician who stood one day by the pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem, still there, but the water is gone, waiting for the water to be troubled so that he might dip in and be made whole. But the angel who troubles the water comes to him and says, "Stand back, sir, healing is not for you. Without your wound, where would your power be that sends your low voice of inspiration trembling into the hearts of others? We, the very angels of God, cannot persuade the wretched and blundering children of earth, as can one human being who has been once broken on the wheel of living. In love's service, only wounded soldiers will do." Only wounds can heal wounds. Only those who've gone through it and have come out the other side can be most helpful and lifting. Alcoholics Anonymous certainly understands that. That's why we need to be careful in trying to help one another. We need to be careful not to say, "Oh, I understand what you're going through," unless we really do. There was a young minister who, whenever he called on parishioners ill and in pain, would invariably indicate that he knew exactly how they felt. One day in the hospital, he walked in on a parishioner. All he knew of her was that she'd had surgery the day before, and it wasn't long before he was saying, "My dear, I had the same experience just a few years ago." To which she said rather icily, "Who is your obstetrician?" If he'd taken the trouble to listen before commiserating, he would have learned she had a baby by C-section the day before. I know exactly how you feel, indeed. But to me, one of the most inspiring examples of the dividends that come from a life of dependency and discipline is the story of George Matheson. I've referred to him before. Probably moves me most deeply because he was, in fact, a minister, but let me tell you a little more about him. He was born in Glasgow, Scotland, March 27, 1842, one of 8 children. He suffered as a child immediately from poor and degenerating vision, had to use powerful glasses and sit near a window in school in order to manage his studies at the elementary level. By the time he was 18, he was almost blind. In spite of his handicap, he went on to the University of Glasgow. His sisters, bless them, learned Latin and Greek and Hebrew in order to assist him in his studies, and he graduated with highest honors. And through it all, they said, he developed the reputation of having a buoyant and inspiring spirit. In his first parish, he surprised everyone that although blind, he could cope with any duty that was imposed upon him. But George was so concerned that people not focus on his handicap rather than what he had to say from the pulpit on Sunday morning, that he would memorize scripture and sermon and appear to be referring to a text. And many of the thousands that came to hear him never knew of his handicap. In this parish on the banks of the Clyde, he became engaged with a young lady he met there, but as his blindness deepened to the point of darkness, his fiancée broke off their engagement and disappeared. Then he went on to a difficult parish in one of the shabby low-lying districts of Edinburgh, an unattractive neighborhood along dreary streets, a cheerless but very large barn of a church, but with a loyal congregation of working folk who packed it every Sunday. He earned the reputation as a great preacher and even was invited to preach for the Queen in 1885, no small honor. With the help of secretary and braille and typewriter, Matheson wrote untiringly, voluminously, many popular books and hymns. 2 of his hymns are in our hymn book. When he retired as their minister, he said this, "I came a little taper among the great torches, the leading preachers of the day. My place was down in the valley. There you will see a man outside the stage with the lights suppressed and the music silent and the dancing ceased. man natural, man struggling hand to hand with life's poverty and toil. These were the masses before which I stood. It was a tragic spectacle. It was blind Samson with his hands upon the gates of Gaza. The Philistines laughed, but I think I lifted those gates an inch. And I think that next to the strength of God and next to your kind cooperation over these years, I was indebted to my own weakness. Because these sons of toil would say, here is a man with an environment no less unfavorable than our own, barred by every gate of fortune, yet refusing to give in, overtaken by the night, and yet confident of the morning. Out of a great dependency upon his God and a great discipline and determination, a great dividend for us all. Because he wrote in the midst of his darkness words that he said seemed to come to him as by an inward voice, words we still sing and share across the centuries. O love that wilt not let me go, O joy that seekest me through pain. He but echoes the apostle, for when I am weak, I am strong. And so are we all. Amen.